trying to go to one more story here. This one's kind of a sad one, but I think we should talk about it. And just so you guys know, trigger warning. This involves the death of a young man, so it's not a pleasant story. But as some of you may have heard, in New York, there's this guy Jordan Neely. So Jordan Neely, he was a black kid. He was living with his mom. I think he had some mental health issues, and then he was mostly known for he was a street performer, and he used to do a Michael Jackson impersonation in Times Square, and that's how he made money. And then I guess his mother died, and then he became homeless, and his mental health deteriorated quite a bit. So he gets on a subway train, and he's upset, and he's really unruly, and basically he's yelling about how he's starving, he hasn't eaten in days and days, and he just wants to get arrested. And he doesn't care if he gets arrested, right? But he's being unruly and yelling and da-da-da. Well, this guy Daniel Penny, and a couple of people, but mostly Daniel Penny, step in. Daniel Penny's an ex-Marine. Daniel Penny starts choking him, gets him in a chokehold, holds him like that for like 10 or 15 minutes, something. It's a long time. And Jordan Neely was the young man having the mental breakdown, basically gets strangled to death on the subway train. And now the guy, Daniel Penny, is being charged with manslaughter. So I'm going to show you this clip. Trigger warning for everybody. This is the actual violent scene on tape.
So if you are not comfortable seeing that, you may want to
skip.
Not watch for the next, skip forward.
Yeah, skip forward for the next, yeah. Or just skip this story entirely and skip forward a couple minutes, yeah. But we're going to watch this tape. So here's the guy got on his phone.
Daniel Penny, the man who put Jordan Neely in a deadly chokehold on a New York City subway, arrived with his attorney at a Manhattan police precinct to turn himself in on Friday. He's expected in court later today.
He did so voluntarily and with the sort of dignity and integrity that is characteristic of his history of service to this grateful nation.
The 24-year-old Marine charged with manslaughter in the second degree with a maximum penalty of 15 years.
Wow. So yeah, 15 years is what they're looking at. I think that video is a little hinky. So here's where we wanted to talk about this a little bit, or at least I did. We have a serious issue with homelessness and people with mental health in this country. And there are solutions to this. One of the big ones is basically giving them housing. It's called Housing First. It's a program that's been around a long time. The understanding, though, that I think that where this gets misled a lot is vast majority of homeless people, like 98%, 99%, they're only homeless for like a year or two or a few years. They're mostly people that had medical problems, or they got laid off their jobs, or something happened, they had to take care of a family member, blah, 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 right? And they're just trying to get back to working on their feet. And one of the solutions to that is providing them with housing, even if it's simple, cheap, like a small apartment, right? Because it's really hard to get a job if you don't have an address or a phone number, if you don't have somewhere safe to go at night, if you don't have a place to clean your clothes or shower, right? So different cities have done this. I know Denver had a lot of success with this, where they did this and they reduced their homeless problem significantly within a couple of years. The second type of sort of homeless person is the one you see most of all, is guys like Jordan Neely. They have mental problems, and they're what we call a chronically homeless person. That's a person that needs serious government help if they're going to stay off the street. They're not going to be able to do it on their own, probably at any point, because they either have severe mental health problems or severe drug addiction problems. And that's something that, we never really addressed mental health. I know John F. Kennedy tried to, but then never followed through. So That's the other issue. And I would say, had we done something about this financially as a country, we probably wouldn't be having a lot of these problems. And this kid would probably still be alive because he'd be in a facility somewhere getting fed instead of trying to get arrested on a subway car so he could get food. Because if he goes to jail, they'll feed him.
Right.
Right? Because that was the big
You go
issue.
to jail, you get fed, and you get an indoor place to sleep.
That's safe.
Right?
That's fairly safe. Yeah. And that's just. And you're going to get fed 3 times a day. As if you're out on the street, you could die at any minute, right? You get sick or something, which is highly likely, right? There's no one to help you. So, kind of what was going on here. Now, that's my main argument. Is just we need to do more about this, and the reality is for somebody like Jordan Neely, what was the? I read an article long time ago when I was doing research on this when I was a police officer, and it was actually the deputy mayor of Denver who sent it to me because he did a lot of work with the homeless, and it was called like $1 Million Mike or something like that, or Marv or what, and it was about a guy who lived in Las Vegas. And what the police there did was they did a study on this guy over a period of a year, and that's what they figured it cost to deal with this homeless guy, right? From EMTs having to pick him up to police having to arrest him. So every time there was a 911 call on this guy, they recorded it and they factored, okay, this is what it cost. So they figured it cost $1 million to deal with this guy over the year, as opposed to we could have put him in a mental health facility and it would have cost us about $70,000 or $80,000. So it's kind of like, when you think about it, it's kind of a no-brainer. We could get him off the street, make sure he's fed and getting treatment, right? And he's with health officials, and it would save the police all this stress and the EMTs all this stress and save the city $1 million. But instead, we'd rather do nothing because it's going to cost money to put that program in place, and nobody wants to do it because everybody's upset about the upfront sticker shock. And it's like, yeah, but over the long run, it's way cheaper, right? So,
Not to mention, neighborhoods are significantly nicer because they're, safer spaces. There are less people that are obviously having issues wandering around, making people feel afraid. The neighborhoods become a much nicer place to be in,
sure,
which is good for people's businesses, right?
Right.
It's good for people who want to be out and about. People want to complain about the streets feeling unsafe and neighborhoods going downhill. People want to make these complaints, but they don't actually want to stop and think about
they don't want to pay for
what
it.
really needs to be addressed in order to make it this nice neighborhood you want to be in.
Well, here's the thing, too, is with a lot of these people that are homeless or they're living on the street and stuff, almost very few of them are necessarily violent. I mean, some are, but we always hear about those. But as a whole, most of them aren't. Like this kid Neely wasn't threatening anybody necessarily that I know of. He didn't attack anybody, right? He was just screaming he wanted to get arrested, right? Now, there was a big pushback about, okay, well, especially from the conservatives, about, well, Daniel Penny's acting in self-defense and da-da-da-da-da, and he's protected the people on the train, and what good is that going to do if we start arresting everybody, da-da-da. Here's the thing. I'm going to talk about this from my perspective as a former police officer, okay? Just simple stuff, because I've had this conversation a bunch of times. In the police academy and when you're on patrol, we had this thing. I don't know what they do in New York. I have some idea what they do in New York. I know what I was trained to do. We had this thing called escalation of force. Okay. Now, As a police officer, I can go one level above the suspect, right? So if I want to detain somebody and they're just resisting, but they're not threatening me or trying to hit me or anything, I can physically move them by force. I can put them in handcuffs. You can pepper spray. You usually don't want to because pepper spray could get into your face, especially if you're outside and it's windy. Plus, it looks bad in court when you're just spraying somebody who's just sitting there, right? Or just standing there and doesn't want to comply. But you can force them if you have to. Now, if I'm dealing with somebody and the guy all of a sudden raises his fists and starts coming at me, I can now move to the next level, so I can pull out my baton and defend myself, right? If the guy comes at me with a weapon, like a knife or something, then I can pull out a gun. But I can't, there's a level where I can escalate. It's pretty clear cut, right? I'm not saying Daniel Penny had any of that training. He was a Marine. He had a very different set of training. I wasn't trained for warfare. I was trained to police. Now, I do know this, though, in New York, like a lot of states, they have, the castle doctrine and you're obligated to retreat in most cases. Right. So in that situation, if somebody's threatening you, you should be trying to retreat if you can. If you can't, then you can, then it's easier to say, I have to defend myself. At no point here was there any violence or assault coming from Jordan Neely that was reported or on tape. It was basically just the guy got behind him and choked him out. Right. So now what you've done is you escalated to a chokehold, which is potentially lethal force for 10 minutes. Okay. So this is where it's going to be difficult for him in court to explain this, because typically, like for a police officer, I don't know what a Marine's trained to do, but we were trained to do what's called a vascular neck restraint. And the whole point of it is you don't ever squeeze the throat. You're squeezing the side of the neck with your arm to try and slow blood flow to the brain so they go to sleep. They pass out. And then you want to get them handcuffed as quickly as possible because they usually wake up within about 20 seconds. But that whole maneuver takes less than 10 seconds if you do it right. You don't do it for 10 minutes. At 10 minutes, now you're potentially harming the person, right? Especially if you're squeezing the windpipe, right? The other thing that's a problem here is you got to factor this. In a case where you're choking somebody, even if you're trying to kill him, let's say he was intended to kill him, right? I don't think he did, but let's say it was. It takes at least 2 minutes to strangle a person to death. Think about how long you can hold your breath. It takes at least 2 minutes. So that's a long, oh, bless you. That's a long time that he's sitting there and he could have stopped at any time.
That was a long time. 10 minutes is a long time.
Yeah, it's the same thing with George Floyd, where the guy was kneeling on his neck and it was over 8 minutes. And I can tell you right now, in the police academy, you can kneel on the suspect's back. But if you kneel on their neck, that's an automatic fail. When I was in the police academy, if you do the choke hold, the VNR hold, you can do it, but you can't do it for more than a few seconds. Otherwise, it's an automatic fail because you're just strangling the person.
Right.
Right? So, it's going to be tough for him in court. I think he'll probably plead it down. He'll probably get 4 or 5 years or something like that. But still, it's hard to say that what he did wasn't excessive, especially given that yeah. I was going to say, I think considering that he's going to have to be hard pressed to show that Jordan Neely was violent to the point where he needed to execute that kind of maneuver. Right.
Right. I mean, even though obviously military training is a bit different because the goal is different than what you received, when you were becoming a police officer, I still think he's going to be hard pressed to be able to make any kind of case for why the force he used jumped so far up
to that level
from what was happening, you know?
Sure.
I mean, listen, I ride the subway, I ride public transit all the time, and when somebody gets on and they start, you know, yelling and screaming about something, even if they're not coming at you, it can be, you know, kind of an alarming sort of scary thing where you're like, oh, is this person,
are they going to do something, or yeah,
and where you're really not sure. So to a degree I can kind of see where this highly trained person was like suddenly on alert, but he's going to have an awful time trying to explain why we went from I'm really, really on alert to that sort of force. Like it's just jumping up too high, as you explained, you know?
right. I mean, I think it would have probably even been excessive if he punched the guy in the face. But if he punched the guy in the face and knocked him out, then he'd be looking at like a minor assault charge. And even then, the kid would be alive and they could probably plead it down. And it probably wouldn't be that big of a deal. But we went straight to strangle him to death. I mean, that's a little bit 0 to 100. I mean,
Yeah, for sure.
you know, that's going to be a tough one to explain. Um, but it also, like I said, it depends where you are. In New York, it's probably going to be harder for him. It's too bad he wasn't in Wisconsin like Kyle Rittenhouse, where that judge just kind of let the whole thing slide, man. So, all right. Well, that's enough.